welcome to Media Spectrum, where stories still matter. Today we're going to be reviewing Christy. Christy was released in November of 2005 and was directed by David Miko. And this was clearly a movie that was a hopeful Oscar contender, an Oscar bait movie. And not only did it fail in that regard, but when it came to the box office, this movie was not merely a failure. No. This was a catastrophe. This earned in its opening week $1.3 million. And by the end of its run, had roughly doubled that. So between the movie budget itself and marketing around $25 million, and it made about $2.6 million. A historic crash and burn financially. And unfortunately, in this day and age, without there really being much of a secondary release market, there's no way it's going to make any of that money back. But hopefully it at least does well on streaming. It's on HBO Max right now. That's how I saw it. But I do think it's absolutely worth watching. I think it deserves so much better. Like, I've seen much worse movies than this be a lot more successful. This is not a perfect movie. I definitely do have some flaws to pick apart about it. But this is, honestly, I would say one of the better celebrity biopic movies I've ever seen. Now, I should state that that's coming from the perspective of someone who doesn't really care for biopics in general, just because they're so formulaic. Like, more than almost any other genre, this is really one where if you've seen one, you've seen most of them. And the formula for these movies usually goes like this. A talented kid pursues their dreams, finds success, becomes a conceited asshole, becomes some sort of addict, has a big crash and burn, some kind of reckoning, then gets a nice redemptive moment, roll credits. Almost every movie in this genre follows that formula to some extent. And this movie definitely does all those things also, but it manages to separate itself from two key factors. The first is that our main character, Christy Martin, who was like the world's first female boxer, she was a closeted lesbian for almost her entire adult life, being forced into that by her family, largely. And kind of in connection with that, she had this fascinating, horribly abusive relationship with her trainer/husband, Jim. And those two elements combine to make this a far more dark, twisted, almost sinister biopic than you're usually going to see. And this is an interesting case study in spoilers, because this isn't just some fictional story. This is a real life incident. You can Google Christy Martin right now, and you'll pretty much immediately see the incident that this movie's building up to. But I went into this blind, not really knowing anything about her or her story, and was stupefied by the ending, just flabbergasted. And ideally, if you don't know her story, I want you to have that experience also. So I'm going to try to avoid talking about any of the real spoilers up until a noted section at the end of this. But yeah, if you don't know her story, I would encourage walking into this as blind as you can. So the first thing I want to talk about is her lesbianism. So it's important to know that this movie starts in 1989 and takes place pretty much through the 90s up till 2010. And it's also important to know that this isn't in San Francisco, this isn't in Greenwich Village, this is West Virginia. And so, not too surprisingly, her family is very unsupportive of her lifestyle. Like, literally minutes into the movie, her mom is fretting about these rumors she's heard about her and some other girl, and the family's talking about taking her to a preacher to straighten her out. You know, it's that kind of dynamic. And her mom in particular really seems to be the driving force behind a lot of this family toxicity. Her brother actually seems fairly supportive. Her dad, kind of on the fence. He seems to soften a bit over the years. But her mom, throughout all of this, is one of the most unsupportive, worst parents you could possibly meet. Someone who cares about the image of her family so much more than the actual well-being of the people in her family. We don't get a lot of time with her mom, but enough to make a very strong negative impression. And for Christy in particular, she's kind of what we'd call a butch. She's very much not trying to be a super feminine, girly girl. But one of the first things Jim does is dress her all in pink for her fights, and that becomes kind of her signature. And as the years roll on and she starts becoming more of a celebrity, they really kind of create this image of her, trying to paint her as this ideal, almost traditional housewife who just happens to be really good at punching other women in the face. And even in her promos before the shows, she does all this mad trash talking of her opponents, including one of her big rivals, Lisa, is an open lesbian, and so she calls her a dyke and makes fun of saying, I'm gonna make you so ugly even your girlfriend will recognize you, which is pretty crazy coming from a closeted person, but very often those who are screaming the most end up being in the closet. That's a story we've seen a lot before. Even when Lisa, like, in the ring tries to show her some respect and wish her luck, she just throws her right back in her face.
Hey, Martin!
Good luck. Good luck getting knocked out.
And, like, it's honestly, from the surface level, it really does seem like she's just becoming an absolute bitch as she gets more and more famous. But it's easy to see where a lot of this rage is coming from her repression, her inner turmoil, and just the condition her life is turning into. And at the same time, her husband Jim is carefully curating most of this. In particular, there's a segment she does on live TV complaining about her pay that is revealed to be planted from Jim. And so it's easy to kind of look at everything she's doing and saying, well, Jim is probably telling her to do a lot of that. And it's one of the really interesting things, especially looking back on this, or if you watch the movie a second time, through kind of the second and third acts that mostly focuses on just the boxing career part of her life, how much of this persona is her rage manifesting in different ways, and how much is it Jim coaching and instructing her. That's kind of an interesting between the lines element of this film. Because bear in mind, like, this movie ends in 2010, and to that point, she still was in the closet. She spent a good 30-some years of her adult life in the closet with everyone in her family knowing that she was queer, but just because they couldn't handle that, and so they tried to just bury it and hide it. And that does add a real sense of tragedy to all of this. You know, she's someone who's living a dream life in many ways, and yet it's not her life. She is just so buried under all of this. And it's very, very easy to empathize with her and feel for her in this situation. And then the other element is Jim, who, sweet, sweet Jesus. You know, this is a guy who she kind of gets pushed into the relationship, both from her family pressure of just wanting her to be with a man, period. Her mom in particular loves Jim because of course she does. They're both crazy control freaks. And then also Jim kind of has these ways of manipulating her, of painting himself as, look, I'm the guy who's going to get you to the top. You can marry me or you can go off with your girlfriends and be nothing.
Want to lose your trainer, your career, all of it?
And so she ends up agreeing to marry him, even though it seems a pretty loveless marriage. And, I mean, this guy makes a bad impression from the very beginning. Like, literally, when she first shows up at the gym to train with him, he just totally brushes her off. And then when he gets, like, instructed to train her, he tells the guy, dude, get her out of here, break one of her ribs if you have to. And it's not till she floors that other guy boxer that he starts, like, looking at her like, oh, okay. And initially, for the first act, he doesn't seem that bad. Like, yeah, there are some definite red flags, but a trainer kind of has to be a hard ass. A trainer kind of has to push you in some ways. And maybe this is the kind of guy where once you earn his respect, he becomes better. There are definitely people like that who are total assholes until you can earn their respect. And maybe he's that kind of flavor of good old boy. Nope. As the movie goes on, he just gets worse and worse and worse. He just gets slimier and uglier and grosser. He's a con artist, he's a liar, he's a manipulator, he's a user. And he has this very bizarre dynamic where he simultaneously is trying to ride Christy's coattails, but constantly undercutting her also. Constantly doing little things, like when she meets Don King, giving her a tape of her footage that doesn't even work, trying to make the deal go bad, trying to keep her down low enough so that he can firmly control her, while trying to get everything he can out of her. It is such a bizarre, toxic dynamic that goes to some really sick and perverse places. There are things this movie does just enough to hint at that really, really make your skin crawl. In a way, this guy kind of reminds me of James Woods' pimp character from Casino, but worse. So much worse. Like, he makes that guy look like a gentleman by the end of this movie. By the time the credits rolled, this is a man with zero redeeming qualities. Zero. I'm struggling to think of other characters who I have hated this much by the end of a movie or end of a series. I'm thinking Joffrey Baratheon. I'm thinking Dolores Umbridge. Percy from The Green Mile. I'm struggling to think of other characters who I've hated, actually just viscerally hated, more than this sick son of a bitch. And this is a real guy. That's the craziest thing. There are elements of this movie by the end of it where if this was a fictional story, I would be calling bullshit. I'd be saying there's no way. There's absolutely no way someone can be this vile and this incompetent and this everything. There's no fucking way. Except there is, because he existed. And holy shit. By the end of this movie, I'm just sitting there kind of flabbergasted. Like, I cannot believe this happened. I cannot believe he did what he did, and I cannot believe it turned out the way it did. Just holy shit. And all this, I have to call out the actor, Ben Foster. I don't think I've heard of his name before. He looks familiar, kind of. He looks like one of those that guy actors that I've probably seen before, but he is absolutely on my radar now. As much as I hate the character, I also have to admire what an incredible performance it is from the actor. And that's maybe the most unfortunate thing about this movie bombing so hard, is he did not get any of the recognition, any of the accolades that he probably deserved for this. This movie is worth watching for his scumbag performance alone. Like, if you want to see a movie with some toxic scumbag who you are going to relish hating, this movie delivers that in spades. And then on to Sydney Sweeney and her performance as Christy. Now, several weeks ago, I reviewed The Housemaid and called her out as kind of the weakest element of that. I was not impressed with her as an actor in that movie at all. In this movie, she does better. She's solid. I wouldn't call her great. She's still definitely not Meryl Streep. She's not an Emma Stone. She's not, one of those Oscar caliber actresses, not yet at least. But she does really well in this when she's trash talking. She does really good when she's showing Christy's rage. And she does have some more emotional moments that she does a lot better at. There's a scene in particular where her relationship is just spiraling out of control and she opens up to her mom for some help. And her mom just calls it crazy and throws it back in her face.
I need help, Mama. He's angry at me all the time.
Oh, Christy. You sound crazy.
And she does a very, very good job of selling just how lost and heartbroken and desperate her character is at that point. That's probably her best bit of acting in this movie. In general, she does enough to show us some of the turmoil and some of that there's something simmering in this woman, but I'm not quite convinced that she has the tools to handle someone this complicated yet. Like, watching her performance in this, it's kind of like watching a kid swim in the deep end of a pool for the very first time. And they managed to swim from one side to the other successfully. They managed a nice little doggy paddle. They don't drown. So good. They were able to handle it. They were able to make it. But they're not doing any fancy dives yet. They're not doing any fancy strokes. They're trying to handle it. That's kind of how I feel like watching this performance. She's able to do enough to not embarrass herself and get through it and do well enough. But I do wish we had a slightly stronger actor trying to handle a character with this many layers of trauma behind them. But with that said, I do really respect her effort here. I know that she trained for several weeks boxing. She put on something like 30 to 35 pounds of muscle. This isn't quite Charlize Theron in monster levels of disappearance, but she is trying to disappear into this character. Her accent's not entirely consistent, but it's not awful. It's certainly better than the Irish accents in Gangs of New York I made fun of a few weeks ago. She's solid. She's not amazing. She's not awful. She's solid in this, and I hope she gets better. But I admire the effort of nothing else. And I also will say, between this and The Housemaid, that's two movies I've seen of hers now that started as something that seemed pretty simple and recognizable, but then took a sharp turn into something way more dark and twisted than I was expecting. So she's showing an interesting eye for what movie she's picking up, at least. And that's a big factor in it. I think that's something a lot of people don't give enough credence to, is an actor's ability to pick their scripts. And she is picking some interesting projects, so I will give that to her for sure. And then the last thing I can really say before going into the spoilers is the structure of this movie overall. It's basically broken into 4 acts, each one separated by like a title card that shows us what year we've progressed to. And for a 2 hour and 15-minute movie, it does a pretty good job overall of handling things. But Christy's life outside of the boxing ring is so much more interesting to me than just the boxing stuff itself. And There's especially a revelation in like the post-movie scroll where it tells you this character's this now, this character's this now, that kind of floored me and made me really wish that we'd had some more context of what happened later in her life. I'm being a little vague now. I'll talk about this more shortly in the actual spoiler section. But I do think this movie probably could have been a little more restructured to have streamlined a little more of the boxing. Like, still had that. You still need to focus on that, but give just a little more attention to some of her outside of the ring relationships, and especially to her later life. I would have really loved to have seen a little more information about. So now we reach the spoilers, where I can finally talk about the ending of this movie. The ending of this movie, like the last final act of this movie, is fucking crazy. So Christy finds out what we've pretty much always known, that Jim is skimming money from her fights, that he's dangling these potential fights in front of her as a carrot to keep her going when he knows those fights are never going to happen. And she finally snaps and she breaks up with him. And the first thing he does is send some dirty picture of her with another girl to everyone, to her family, to their gym mates, to their boxing colleagues, everyone. He just shoves her right out of the closet immediately. Oh, and after he sends these pics out and forces her out of the closet, he starts stalking her immediately, sending her creepy texts while she's at a diner with her ex, letting her know, like, hey, I can see you right now, of course. And it's frightening. It's genuinely kind of frightening. But then after that, she decides to go back home. She decides, you know what, I've been hiding my whole life. I'm not going to hide anymore. I'm not going to let this man kick me out of my own house. I'm going home. So she does. And then Jim actually tries to kill her. He stabs her like a good half dozen times, if not more, with a kitchen knife. And then in this super chilling sequence that's so eerie and creepy for just how cold it is, he goes to the bathroom, starts getting ready to shave. He comes back into the bedroom with his face covered in shaving cream. Then he has a bright idea. He opens the drawer, grabs her own gun, shoots her with it at point-blank range, and then goes back to finish his shower. And the craziest part of this, after all that, she's still alive. Motherfucker stabbed her half a dozen times, shot her at point-blank range, and she is still alive. As he's showering, she gets up, gets out of the house, finds she has the keys to the wrong car for the car that's blocked in, makes her way down the driveway with like a big chunk of her leg hanging off. It's horrifying to look at. Mercifully gets picked up by a good Samaritan and gets taken to the hospital. I mean, this is what I mean when I said if this was a fictional story, I'd be calling bullshit. There's just no way. But this is what happened. This is what actually happened to this woman. And on the one hand, holy shit, her badassery cannot be understated. This has to be one of the toughest people to ever live. That's insane. That is absolutely insane to survive something like that. But then on the other hand, Jim, not only is he this fucking vile, but the incompetence, the sheer otherworldly incompetence to do all that stuff to a person and yet still not do anything fatal to them. God, I would love a chance to just look this man in the eye and tell him what a pathetic, feckless dipshit,
Cheap, lying, no good, rotten, four-flushing, low-life, snake-licking, dirt-eating, inbred, overstuffed, ignorant, blood-sucking, dog-kissing, brainless, dickless, hopeless, heartless, fat-ass, bug-eyed, stiff-legged, spotty-lipped, worm-headed sack of monkey shit he is! Hallelujah! Holy shit! Where's the Tylenol?
I mean, my God. And honestly, after seeing this, how is Christy Martin not like at least as famous as Mike Tyson, if not exponentially more famous? I don't know how I didn't know this story. How is this story not famous everywhere? It's crazy. It's crazy. I feel kind of embarrassed I didn't know it. But what does that say about our culture that a woman who goes through all this is still not widely known? Just, it's insane. And I think maybe the craziest part of all this is that at the end, when they're giving us, like I said earlier, those little messages after the credits on this is what happened to this character, this is what happened to this character, she went on to marry Lisa, the same lesbian fighter that she trash talked earlier, the same lesbian fighter who came back and helped her train for another fight. She ended up marrying her. And that is such an out of nowhere revelation where this movie does just enough to set up them earning some sort of respectable friendship, but for them to become lovers. And that happened in 2017 was when they got married, by the way, and the movie ends in 2010. And so this is what I mean by I really feel like this movie was almost missing an act at the end. I feel like this movie needed kind of almost like The Irishman did, not as long, but a good like 15-20 minute prologue just to show us that, because I have so many questions at the end of this. Like, does Christy have any relationship with her mom still? Does she have a relationship with the rest of her biological family? How did they go from being just, okay, friends to actual lovers? Like, there's a story there that we're not getting, and I wish we were getting more of that story. So, in conclusion, what we have here is not a perfect movie. It's a movie that I think should have been a little restructured to have slightly given a little more focus to the non-boxing parts of her life. But it's a movie that did genuinely surprise me. You know, it's a movie that's a lot more, I think, than your typical celebrity rise and fall biopic. And Christy Martin's story itself is so inherently interesting that even though the movie can't quite live up to it, it's still worth watching, especially if you don't know what her story is yet. I respect Sydney Sweeney's efforts. I still don't think she's quite at that level that she's trying to get to as an actress, but I respect the work here for sure, and she did better than I thought she would have. And what we're left here is a movie that really deserved better than it got. This did not deserve to be a historic flop. This is a movie that should have been seen, should have been recognized, and especially Ben Foster's performance really, truly deserves some recognition. So I recommend watching the movie for that alone. So that's a wrap for today. If you guys have taken the time to sit through this whole video, I really appreciate it. If you can leave a like and subscribe, it really, really helps this channel grow. I'll see you guys next week. Until then, stay sane, stay human.